All right, guys, happy Friday. Excuse me. Today is May 29th, and wow, where has the month gone? You're hanging out with my community manager, the community built by, for, and managed by community managers. As always, you can go over to our website at mycmgr.com, click on participate, fill out that form, let us know what's going on. You can also hang out with us at our Twitter chat, which is at #CMGRHangout. Remember, guys, please give us topics. Please say you want to be on the show. It's how we keep everything going every week. So we're asking for donations of your ideas. All right, what do we have for you this week? Well, last week was CMX Summit East, and from what I hear, I wasn't there, but I heard that Evan Hamilton gave a fantastic talk on how to measure the ROI of community in your organization. So if you missed it, we'll definitely put in our write-up the link so you can go see it. And also, we'll make sure we put a link so you can see all the key tips from all key sessions. From what everybody tells me, it was a fantastic conference, and they recommend going back. So in his talk, Evan mentioned that, and I'm going to read this, as difficult and challenging as it may be to prove ROI to the CEO, board of directors, and the company as a whole, we need to learn how to do this properly, both for ourselves and the community profession. Then he took the rest of his talk to really break down exactly how you can do that. So in addition to Evan's talk, we also will give you a link to a Citizen Engagement Lab presentation called Beyond Vanity Metrics Towards Better Measurement of Member Engagement. And so really what's going on is we brought some really smart people together today who are community pros, and they definitely understand how to measure and analyze their communities, and they're willing to share some knowledge with you. So we'll go through some questions, and as always, feel free to tweet at the MyCMGR handle or to Dom or Sherry, and we can bring your questions on if we have some time. So with that, I'll just let everybody introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Scott Moore. I'm officially now over 20-year community veteran, building communities from scratch, doing all levels. I currently do consultations on strategy, basically anything you need to build your community, also on transitions in communities, migrations to platforms, and even shutting a community down if you need that.
Hey everyone, I am Sherry. Happy to be back this week. I am Community Manager for Magento, an open source e-commerce platform, as well as co-produce CMGR Hangout here with Brew and Dom.
Hey, Sheldon.
Sorry, I was on mute. I forgot. Hi everyone, I'm Sheldon. I am the Community Manager for Sysomos. I will officially have been doing this for 5 Monday. That will be my anniversary. And yeah, I've been doing this community thing for 5 years. I work for Sysomos, so we do a lot around analyzing and measurement, especially in the social media world. And I also have to say I'm actually really intrigued now about Scott's plan to shut down communities. But maybe we'll get to that in the middle of the chat.
Awesome. Hey, Jen.
I was last. Sorry. Hi, I'm Jen Lopez. I'm the Director of Community over at Moz. And I have been in the community business probably 5 or 6 years and taken the Moz community from a very small group of marketers to up over 600,000. And we've also grown the community team from me doing all the things to a group of people who are much better at doing all of the things because they're very specialized and really good at what they do. And we do a lot of, measuring and the other thing with our particular blog, we talk a lot about marketing, about ROI, about how to measure things and what we're constantly doing. And so it's something that we are always working on and always trying to figure out better ways of doing things. So I'm excited to talk about some of the things that we've done and hopefully learn a little bit as well.
Awesome. That's sweet. Hey guys, I am Dom Garrett, Community Manager at Be the Change Revolutions. as well as co-producer here with Sherry and Brew. It is, I'm proud to say that I'm actually coming to everybody from my childhood bedroom, which doesn't look like my childhood bedroom anymore because my parents got rid of everything here. But yeah, this is a really awesome topic. I was at CMX East along with Sherry and a lot of other people I know are in the chat. And Evan's talk really was pretty awesome. So I think that this is really going to be fun to dig in with some more brains. And I'm ready to just sit back and let you guys teach me a bunch of stuff.
All right, childhood bedroom. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
It's really not, but you know.
Hey everybody, I am Brew, Director of Awesome with Be the Change Revolutions, and then a co-producer here with Sherry at MyCMGR. I'm just going to throw out, Scott, we're going to lob this one over to you. Question number one, really talking about what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative data?
Okay, so first, the easy thing to think about this is because they're similar words, so I even get them mixed up in my head as I'm running through things fast. Quantitative is quantities. It's what you can count. It's numbers. That's easy. Qualitative is what you can't count. And so when we get into qualitative data, it could be interviews. It might be qualitative because there's not a big enough sample size. So you might be able to sample and interview 1,000 people or survey 1,000 people. That becomes quantitative because now you can add it up and you can compare numbers. But you might only have a deep interview with 2 or 3 people who are telling you something really important because of their stature or their unique experience. That's qualitative. It describes the qualities of the experience or the qualities of what the data is. If somebody grabs the link and tweets it out, there's a couple of articles that will really help you understand the difference between qualitative and quantitative, and some of the pitfalls about being careful with qualitative data because it's words and stories, and it might even be images. It's anything you can't count. It might be concepts. A couple weeks ago we talked about culture. Understanding culture is going to be a qualitative experience or exercise. And so some of the pitfalls that fall in is sometimes our biases will cause us to add our own ideas to qualitative data. So Sherry shared out the article. That's great. That has a couple pitfalls in it, and then we'll continue on.
So, quick question. You're saying qualitative data is really easy to have somebody like inject their own opinion. Is that what you're saying, Scott?
Well, it's a bias because when we take an interview, or you take a couple of interviews, or you take some observed data of behavior in a community or in an arena of people, you don't have all the information about why those people are acting in a particular way, and it's easy for us to think, that must be why they're acting. So you have to watch out for your own cognitive biases that you're not accidentally filling in the story. Whereas this article is great about saying, take a step back and say, maybe I don't know the reasons why. So now what I need to do is I need to spend more time asking and learning. And so it's an exercise in getting other people's opinions and actually being because it's subjective most of the time. It's so much easier for our own biases to kind of intercede without our trying.
I think you got an interesting point there, though, Scott. I was going to sort of mention you sort of got into it there on your own, but that a lot of times I found just from working in this sort of industry for a while is that qualitative data can really help to support your quantitative data. I know we deal a lot at my company, Systemos. We deal a lot with measurement, and we give people a lot of numbers that they can look at in terms of their social media analysis or community analysis. But sometimes I find that the best way to have sort of an impact, even with those numbers that you're presenting, even if you have hard numbers, is to have some sort of qualitative data to go with it and back it up, whether it's a story or an interview, as you were saying, with somebody in your community from your audience, whatnot. I think that while there is a really big difference between qualitative and quantitative, they really work well to support each other at the same time.
So question number 2 gets into a little bit of what you're saying, Sheldon, but guys, how can you mix quantitative and qualitative together to build a more comprehensive picture?
I'd love to jump in here with an example and something that we've done here at Moz. So we're a software as a service. You come to our site. Although we have tons of resources to read and whatnot, we make money by getting paid subscriptions to use our tools. And what we were finding is we were getting a lot of people who would cancel, and when they would cancel, they would say that the reason they were canceling was because of the price. And so initially, right, we're like, oh, well, the price is too high. Well, that's really odd because we actually give people much more data, much more information, a lot more tools than some of our competitors do for the exact same price. And so when we really dug in and started asking additional questions and talked to, other people, we would reach out to them and email this, a handful of the people who were canceling. We found that they were actually not qualified, and they were wanting to use our tool for something different than what it really does. And so we were getting non-qualified people in there, and they were canceling because they didn't find value in the service. Not that it was too much money, it was just that it wasn't the right thing. And so that helped us, we can then take that and say, okay, we need to work on our messaging. We need to work on, how we're reaching out and to the community in the first place, and that sort of thing. And it helped us, steer us in the right direction rather than just saying like, oh my God, our price is too high.
Yeah, I would add one of the ways that I've mixed qualitative and quantitative is sometimes I use the quantitative because that's the reporting mechanism. Somebody's looking for that particular number, and then I'll use the qualitative as the story behind the number. I'll do that a lot when I'm trying to explain why a number may have changed due to some reason that's out of our control or whatever, or it's a normal trend. It's like, look, numbers went down this month. It's because last month something went viral. Don't worry about it. Or it's getting a story where something has happened with the quantitative data, and then it's like, so here's some more stories around what's going on with the qualitative. So sometimes I use it as I use the quantitative because that's what people want, and then I use the qualitative to kind of help explain. I've also I don't remember if we talk about this if this question is coming up. Not really. So I'll answer it here. I've also spent time when I'm reporting about my community. I've been in a position where I will always make sure that I am having a meeting with somebody about that report. So it'll be my boss or it'll be my team, and it'll be not only am I going to hand you the data, but I'm actually going to talk about this report so that people have more an understanding of what's going on behind the data. That's just something that I found has helped me. Otherwise, you send out a bunch of data and then nobody gets back to you and you have no idea if people are using it or not.
I think it's important, too, that you use that qualitative data to make sure that you're the one forming the story, not necessarily those who are reading it and receiving it. Because if you don't paint the picture for them, they'll do it themselves, and they might reach different conclusions that either A, aren't really the right representation, or B, aren't quite what you wanted them to see.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Cherie. This idea, I mean, we're all, in a way, and I know some people hate this, but we're all, storytellers, right? And this is, just giving us the perfect mix of having that very factual that you can't change, and then gives us more of that qualitative to sort of be able to lead in the direction that we're looking at, show what goals are actually being met or how this is going to help meet the goal, even if, say, the quantitative isn't quite there yet. The qualitative can help you show that you're trending towards that. So especially when you're dealing with the C-suite, it's really important to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, Scott got into it a little bit there, but it's by doing the explanations along with some of your quantitative data, it really helps, because I know we have a lot of customers who do stuff like customer service through social media, and so one of the things they like to look at is what's the sentiment around our brand, and you know, you can show them numbers around sentiment, but the best way to sort of explain that better is to have these little stories that go along with it. So there's a, you know, an outstanding number of positive sentiment, say this week or this month or whenever you do your reporting, you know, to be able to go through what's happened in the month and pull out specific stories that you can say to people, well, here's why, here's where we rocked it, here's where we're killing it. And the same goes for negative. If, you know, the C-suite especially, I think, will see like negative sentiment around something, and they'll be like, everybody hates us, they're going to start freaking out, and it may not really be the case. It may just be there's an issue. It may also just be how some systems sort of perceive negative words as opposed to other ones. So it's always good if you have those little stories to back up whatever you're saying. And I think Scott makes a really good point that if you can sort of tell those stories in person, it works really, really well, especially if you're the person who's really close to what's been going on. But if you can't, it's always good to like try and you know, find some stuff to sort of back those numbers up with, whether it's a couple tweets that you can show off to somebody in a report or something else that's going to help to back up your numbers and why this is happening and what's going on.
I'd like to interject that just as a reminder that qualitative and quantitative are strongest when they're together, but they do both operate independently. And so there are some things that are qualitative that don't have numbers, and they can still be extremely powerful in conveying some aspect of your community. What is it? Slybald guys was talking at their forum for guys who shave their heads, and they were talking about the fact that they just had their first user meeting, and not user meeting, but user wedding. So they had two people who got married, and telling the story about how those people met on that particular mostly men's forum and got married is purely qualitative, but it tells you something about the character of that particular community. I can tell these stories about at the parents forum. I had one parent who had a child who was going through high stakes testing and failed it 7 times. And each time was going back to the community, actually came into the community to about the 4th failure. And the subsequent 3 failures and the final success was all part of her getting support inside of that particular community. That's purely qualitative information, but it tells a lot about the character of how that community was supporting this particular individual and the struggles that that typical community members were actually going through. So again, the point is, qualitative information can be very powerful, even without the quantifying aspect of it. And sometimes we have to be careful because we try to quantify the qualitative, and sometimes that diminishes the power of the qualitative, because that's just one person, that's just one example. And if we rely too heavily on tying it to a number or using the number to justify the qualified information, then we lose that kind of power that can actually move the needle on other things that you might be trying to do. So qualitative data can be very powerful, even on its own.
Interesting. As you guys were talking, I really just thought about the just early, early on in my career, just looking at Excel sheets, right, where people were pulling numbers, not even in community, just data, right? And I always would warn people, like, well, be careful, because I call these people like Excel wizards, who are just able to make you believe anything because there's data and rows and columns, right? and so but thinking about it, being able to actually put, like, let's say some screenshots along with it, it makes it even more powerful, your ability to sway someone or to make someone believe something through that power, or through the combo as well, right? It's like, hey, 44 millions of these, and then a screenshot of like something really awesome. It might have only been the only thing that was awesome that happened on a campaign, but like together, you can really, you can just allow the reader to make their own assumptions, like, well, that was a lot of awesomes. And it must have been really amazing. And so I think there's gotta be careful on how you use that power.
Yeah. The thing that I always think about too when you're using both of them is that most of the time, like we always talk about how you have to use the right language to your community. You have to speak to them the way that they, can understand. It's the same way when you're turning it around and you're bringing this data and you're bringing it to, people within the C-suite. Some people look at numbers and look at spreadsheets, and they love that, and that's what they can really understand. You can give them a great deck that has a bunch of screenshotted tweets, and it doesn't hold the same weight for them as seeing that actual physical data. And then you're going to have some of the same people that you're going to be presenting these reports to that are on the opposite side of that, and they need to see that. So when you do have that combo and you know sort of which way to use it when you need to, it makes you incredibly valuable, number one. But then it also makes you a very powerful voice for your community, which is the reason that you're there, is to be able to be that voice. So the ability to do that well is bodacious, as Patrick Helen might say.
Let's jump ourselves into this third question, which is the difference between predictive and diagnostic data, and do you include both? So, wow, who wants to help us understand the difference of what those two big words are?
I'll jump in here.
All right.
Wait, once I figure out how this mute button works properly. There's a very big difference between diagnostic and predictive, and that's the really easy part to understand. So diagnostic is taking a look at what's happening right now, what's happened in the past. So the best way to think about it is sort of, when you take your computer and they do a diagnostic check. They're checking out what's going on, what's been happening with it. But what they're not doing is a predictive test. And what predictive is going to be what's going to happen in the future. How can we use this data to interpret or at least estimate what's going to happen in the future? This is something we've actually been focusing a lot on recently, because we think that there's a lot of really great information available through your community and through social media in general. And if you know how to properly look at it and analyze it, you're going to be able to say, this is what I think is probably going to happen in the future based on this data that we have, which is really going to allow you to make sort of better business decisions or community decisions, depending what kind of practitioner you are looking at this. In terms of do you include it or not is a completely different story. My initial thought would be to tell you all, yes, definitely include it. But it's going to depend on what you're doing. I mean, there's times when it definitely comes in a lot more handy to include like predictive things. Like if you're going to be running a campaign, you can sort of base some of your predictive assumptions on what's happened in the past, what you've changed from your learnings from what you did in the past, and this is what we think is going to happen with this next coming campaign. In terms of just overall predictiveness, I mean, it's definitely smart of something to look at, but it really depends on, I guess, what your goals are and if they need predicting or not. Maybe somebody else might have a thought on that.
I'll just jump in because oh, sorry. I was just going to say I'll jump in because this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, partially through lithium training and also just in setting up new KPIs and whatnot. And really just looking at predictive is more, for me, looking at like how the health of the community is and indicating kind of how it's going to grow. So in our case, like that's specifically forums. So you're looking at things like how long it takes for the first reply or the first solution to happen on a post, like how many replies there are per post, how many posts there are per board to make sure that you don't have too many boards spread out and things like that. Whereas like our diagnostic measurements are looking more at member registrations, at how many posts there are overall, how many page views there are overall, which are not things that you can control for the future and don't necessarily indicate how it's going to be going forwards. But that responsiveness indicated by the other metrics kind of help indicate how those predict or diagnostic metrics will change over time.
Yeah, I would say, like, you can also use that for, say, for example, like seasonality, right? So let's say your diagnostic data specifically shows that at certain times of year, you're getting a lot more questions being asked or activity happening in the forum or on the blog or whatever the case may be. Then you can do, so like for us, we on a quarterly basis set up our goals for the next quarter. Oftentimes we take a look at what the numbers were last quarter and then try to predict and maybe we say 10% growth in this area or whatever. But we also know that in December, like the entire month of December is like nothing for us, and we can see that year after year. So when we get to that Q4 planning and such, right, we're going to plan slightly differently than we're going to plan in the first quarter of the next year, because activity is going to be different and our growth is going to slow, and it's perfectly okay. And we have to also use that predictive knowledge of helping everyone understand that when the numbers don't go up as much as they did in the previous quarter, that it's not a horrible thing. It's something that happens every single year. And I think that's one thing that you can use with that diagnostic data. By looking backwards, you can also try to predict, what's going to happen looking forward.
I agree with everything Jennifer just said. I agree with everything everybody else has been saying too. But Jennifer nailed a number of things that I wanted to call out. I would go. You can even go more granular with that cyclic information. I can right now. I can predict based on past diagnostic experience that if you run an educational community of either educators or a parent community, I can tell you when your highs or lows are. Your weekends are going to be low. Your weekdays are going to be high. If you're an entertainment or an education, or a game community, then it's going to be reversed. And your holidays and your weekends are going to be high, and your afternoons may be high, but your weekdays are going to wind up being overall low. So this is a way of understanding your cycles. You can also do it by topic. So I would layer in when we were at the Charles and Helen Schwab Foundation. Based on, and this wasn't even online diagnostic information, past history, it was a collected learning center where people came in and collected educators who understood what was going on. We were able to know, and this set the editorial calendar for the year, that May was going to be our peak for the first part of the year, because that's when first report cards come in and kids are starting to, the parents are shocked that their kids are not doing as well in the new grade. And then it will peak again. I'm sorry, it would peak, I'll go back to the school year. It'll peak in October when first report cards come in, because people are surprised. And then it would peak again in May when last report cards came in and they found out their kids were actually failing their grade or something like that. And so we were able to create an editorial calendar that actually that predicted what was coming up. So a great example was every March would be a big push on our website about helping parents find summer camps, because by the time parents are thinking about summer camps in May, they're full. So we knew that if you want to actually help somebody, we use that predictive information. So it's not just it's setting expectations, as Jennifer said, which I think is really important to say, hey, look, this is a normal high, this is a normal low. But you can actually set content around it and predict what content is going to be occurring before it actually occurs, and that can help you be more effective in managing your community or doing other aspects of the business that you're in.
No, that's totally a great point. I've seen a lot of our clients who have been using the data they've been collecting over years to sort of predict what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and even find like interesting things that you wouldn't have thought. That you wouldn't have thought of before. So, like the Christmas time boom for retail stores and the slowdown for B2B companies like Jen and me, like it's, that's a sort of obvious thing. But when you start to look through a whole bunch of back data, you may start to notice like other interesting things like I can't remember the specific client off the top of my head, but like somebody noticed that, May, they had this huge spike in both the way people are talking about them and their sales, and they didn't really have anything to explain it because they were, I believe they were like a B2C company, and they were like, well, we do most of our sales around December because that's when people start buying presents for everybody, and they started looking through all this data, and they noticed it happened 2 years in a row, and they dug into it, and they said there's this really big like convention or user gathering of some sort that they didn't even know about, that their community was putting on without them, and it really made their like social conversations and sales spike around that time, and they were able to use this data and find it. So now they do all this planning for it, and they've gotten involved with the user gathering or a conference, or I can't remember exactly what it was. And I've seen a whole bunch of clients do it, but that data that you have from the past is definitely going to help you predict what's going to happen in the future, and it's going to be great for stuff like content planning, because you'll be like, okay, we see this pattern that this happens every year, and well, we're not talking about it. Maybe now we should start thinking, okay, that time of year's coming up, let's put some content out around it, and get in on this conversation, because other people are going to be having it with or without us anyways.
So what do you guys think? What are some things that we can, or what things can we and should we measure beyond discussions and likes? And for those playing along on Twitter, this is question number 5, now 4.
I'd love to jump in here.
Yeah,
so
go for it.
I feel like I get this question all the time. And you can measure like a kabillion things, right? I know that's not a real word. My 7-year-old tells me that. You can measure like anything and everything, but you don't necessarily have to. It totally depends on what your goals are and what you're actually trying to figure out. I mean, you could measure, how many interactions, you could measure how many clicks it takes for somebody to sign up for whatever. You can measure all these things. But if you don't know exactly what your goals are and what you care happens and what you want to get out of it, then it doesn't really matter. So knowing exactly what your goal is, maybe what the organization's goal is, and what you're helping lead toward that goal is the best way to determine then what you really want to track and what you really want to measure. Because there's so many things to measure, but if you just spend your time measuring it and not really knowing how it's helping you, then it doesn't really matter, right? I know that didn't answer the question.
No, but I think it's an important first point to the question for sure.
It's an important first point for everything. If you look at what the first thing that Evan Hamilton said at CMS, it was understand what your goals are. Yesterday, Crystal Coleman, that girl Crystal on Twitter, did a workshop session and started off with what is your objective, what is your goals, and then you have to figure out what your metrics are. In the PDF that you guys sent out, I remember this because I memorized it because I wanted people to know it. It's page 39 of that report that says get your sequencing right. Number 1 is what are you actually trying to do, and then you start figuring out how you're going to do it, and then you start figuring out how to measure it. So it's the foundation. We didn't talk about it because I'm hoping that we only have to say it this once, but it is the foundation of what we need to be doing when we're talking about goals. It's just that important.
I wish we did only have to say it once, but I feel like we have to say it a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever someone is like, well, what would you do in this situation? Like, well, like, what are the goals? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, it's not just a blanket, what do you measure? Like, for everyone, it's the same thing. Absolutely not. It's going to be different based on your team's goals, your company's goals, your customers' goals. Like, what is everyone trying to accomplish, and how can you work together towards a goal that helps everyone?
I always say, like, start with the end in mind. What does the headline read, right? If people were so blown away because things worked out, what would the headline read, and then how do you work back from there? Let's see, what question we are. I'll throw us question number 6, formerly question. No, so question 5, formerly question 6. How do you efficiently collect data? I would assume that even though it's 2015, there's still not great ways to collect all the data. So what are some ways you can stay efficient?
I mean, there's all kinds of tools out there that people can use to help them. Again, it's going to depend upon what data is important to you and what you need. I'm particularly biased when it comes to social media measurement, and I'm going to tell everybody you should check out Sysomos. Use Sysomos; it's awesome. But that's a personal bias of mine. But I really do believe it too, and you should check it out. But there's all kinds of different things, and every tool sort of has its own unique sets of measurements and what you're able to do with that data once you have it as well. So it's going to depend. So if you're looking for social data, there's a ton of tools out there where you can use it to collect social data. But then if you're looking for some of that stuff we were talking about earlier, like some of that more qualitative data, talking to people directly is a great way to collect it. Using Google Forms or like a survey program of some sort to talk to your community and get their real thoughts on it, that's a good way to do it. There's a million different ways to do it, and I know we said we were only going to say it once, but it's going to go back to what are your goals, what are you trying to do, and what's the best way to get the data to help support that.
I think some of this might go. So it might go with the next question as well. But something that we do once we determined exactly, what we want to measure, what's important to us. A lot of what we focus on is engagement, whether it's on the site, like on-site engagement, comments, responses in the forum, or whether it's engagement on social. That's been a big focus for us, or attending a webinar, that sort of thing. What we do is we track everything on a weekly basis. So every Monday, we go in and we track last week's. We put all the data into Google Doc, and then on a monthly basis, we take it and we put it into. We use Pixel Chart or something like that, and we actually send the information out to the entire staff. So it's not even just the community team. We send it to all staff. It breaks everything down. We give a written description of exactly what this thing means, why we're tracking it, why we care about it, and then there's a visual of the data looking a certain way. And once we've sent it out internally and we've had discussions around it, we then actually also send it out externally and promote it to our community so that the community can see sort of what's happening within the community as well. And again, our community is like online marketers and such, and so it's helpful for them as well to see how we do things as a way to, training as well. But that's one thing how we do it is we track it on a weekly basis, and then we give a big, put the whole picture together on a monthly basis and send it out to everyone and have discussions around it that way.
So on efficiently collecting data, I'm gonna start with kind of a technical concept level, and then there were some interesting tools that I can't endorse, but I took a peek in there, and so we'll get down from technical to maybe beginner stuff. So collecting your data, if you don't have people who are doing it, if you don't have a service that's actually collecting your data, I know this is going to sound weird and technical, but the concept of data warehouses is not foreign. It's a lot of people and with big data are using it. It's the idea where all your live data gets dumped into one database, and this allows you to pull in. This is mostly for quantitative. Although this technically would work for qualitative information too. But it stores it in one space so that you can then start mixing all your different signals together. Or if nothing else, you're not taking load off of your live servers. So there's whole structures about collecting data effectively, efficiently, especially when you're dealing with vast amounts of data. Now, to make it kind of easier on folks, because you might have multiple data sources, so I'm just going to read off a bunch of tools that were talked about the other day. And again, I don't endorse any of these tools because I haven't had a chance to really dig into them, but they sound kind of interesting. Tableau, Chart.io, these seem like they're good for mixing different data sets. Good Data apparently also does data warehousing along with mixing. Mixpanel will help you do SQL queries on your data for non-coders, so you're building your queries, but you don't have to learn SQL. And there are a couple others, but those seem, I mean, I'm just throwing those out. So these are things to explore on collecting, on efficiently collecting your data. I would also say, even if you don't know if you need the data, so this is kind of back to something that Jennifer said. I am a data hound in that I believe in collecting every scrap of data that I possibly can, even if I don't know that I'm going to need it right now. But filter heavily that the things that you are measuring and that you are reporting on tie directly to your goals. But there's all this other data that might be diagnostic information, or might be troubleshooting information, or might be discovery information. And so you might have vast amounts of data that you might get some free time and say, hey, I'm going to go dive in and see what's going on over here. This is something I've actually done for folks, like pulling all of the profile data down and seeing how the profiles are actually being used so that we can then take a look and say, do we want to shift how we're presenting profile information? Also, the whole process of just filling out profiles, like, wow, nobody's using this field, let's get rid of it. So I'm all about collecting as much data as possible, but there's different ways of being able to use it. So just because you collect it doesn't mean you have to use it.
So I'm actually familiar with a couple of those tools you just mentioned there, Scott. Yeah, so like ones like Tableau. There's also another one called Ticker that we do some work with. They're essentially, what they are is they're tools that will help you input a whole bunch of different data sources and collect them and layer them on top of each other, or show them visually better. So they're really good for if you're using a couple different tools, a couple different, getting data streamed in through a couple different places. I mean, they'll take Google Excel, not Google Excel. They'll take Excel, Google Docs data as well and do the same. But yeah, they're essentially for putting together larger reports, but they'll also work with like some APIs, so you can do some real-time tracking of some of that data as well. And they're really cool, and I definitely recommend checking them out if you guys are putting together like really large reports with data sets from a bunch of different sources.
Also, I don't know if anyone mentioned this, but have you guys ever had to do any kind of like use screen scraping tools to in order to get data? I know there's times where it's just like you need something, ooh, that's important, and you can be really efficient instead of giving it to an intern or having to make it yet another weekly or daily task. If you have a lot of those, sometimes a little screen scraping tool can really help you grab everything you need real fast.
You mean something like Command-Shift-4 on my Mac that I am a big fan of and I use multiple times a day?
Command-Shift-4?
Yeah.
What does that do?
That's a screen capture.
Yeah, it's the screen capture for on your Mac, but it lets you. I think it's Command-Shift-3 is take the full screen, and Command-Shift-4 is just get a little part of it.
Yeah, so like a screenshot, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I specifically mean is there's actually other programs you can write, or you can download a little piece of software, a screen scraper, that'll actually let you, like you say, record. You go to the Facebook page, this, that, like wherever that little piece of data is that you can't get in a report, and then you can highlight it, and basically what it'll do is mimic that, even logging in, and so it'll blow through real fast and mimic whatever you just had to do to go get that number or that data or that whatever. So so if you have like tools all over that are giving you visual data, but then you're finding yourself copying and pasting lots of stuff, screen scrapers will save you a ton of time, so you don't have to copy and paste.
Oh, that's
So
actually really useful. That's sort of what I'm doing, but I guess in a more automated
yeah,
sort of way.
I'm all about scraping the screens. There's been many times when I can't get data out of a client's back end for whatever reason, and I'm just like, I will just copy and paste. I'm a wizard at copy paste, drop it into a text file, resort tabs into whatever I need, then pop it back into Excel, and then I start doing my data analysis. Yeah, I've done it out of necessity. It's not fun, but I've done it out of necessity, and I also do it when I do competitive analysis. So if I want to go in there and I'm working with a client and they're like, oh, well, here's related communities, and you can't get the information about what that community is doing in terms of quantifying it because they don't give it to you. So yeah, I've jumped into other people's forums and I've scraped all the data and I pull it in together and I start going, hey, so they've got, they're claiming this many users, but I'm only seeing this many posting in the last 30 days. And then you can create your own analysis of so you can do that as competitive analysis, but you can also do it as marketing analysis or as your audience, your potential community analysis. If you have to go to somebody else's site, and find out what's going on in the community, and sometimes it's just really fast. I've done it with hashtags in Twitter, where I just spewed out a giant hashtag, and then I just did a giant screenshot, stuffed it in Excel or whatever, and then I just started doing wordplay with it. And whatever your analysis tool is, yeah, big fan of scraping those pages. Academics have been doing it forever. That's the only way they had access to studying communities, and they still do it because so many communities are not willing to actually give you the APIs, or the APIs are broken, or they don't give you what you want.
I think mentioning APIs is key. That's one really great way to be able to get data from different sources, right? Is understanding kind of what an API is, how you can get the data, understanding tools that you can use to like pull it in, and that sort of thing. That's a really smart thing to learn and understand.
All right, keep us on track with time. I'm going to jump us into formerly question 7, now question 6, which is, if you're keeping track, how do you effectively use your data to paint a picture for stakeholders? I think this is a really powerful question. Hopefully have some wise answers. Nobody's wise.
I think some of it goes back to what I mentioned before, is finding, for us, the way we do it is we have our monthly, we call it the Community Chronicle. We also have Community College, where you can come learn about community. That goes with the Kabillion that I mentioned earlier. So one way that we do it is we do have this that goes to all staff, like this chronicle that specifically talks about what's been happening over the month, it gives you a view of the last 6 months and what's happening and whatnot. But then we find that there are certain people that have that need additional information, and we've also done specific presentations to the executive team, where we sit down with them and we show them, this is how, this is what's happened over time. We use it in a way to show that we need more resources, more like dev resources, is to show like how things have come and gone. And I'm seeing a bunch of smiles. What's happening over here?
Basically, I was giving Dom a hard time for constantly yawning, and he was giving me a hard time for noticing. That's all. Continue. You were saying good things.
Yeah, standard stuff. Carry on.
Anyway, I think there are just lots of ways to do it, but getting consistent. If people expect to get the information on a consistent basis, it's a lot easier on them to digest it and understand it because they're sort of expecting it to happen and they know what they're looking for. And so keeping that consistency of whether you do it once a quarter, once a month, once a week, probably not once a day, but depending on what your community is, being consistent about it and giving something that they kind of know what to expect and when to expect it, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, I think this question actually spans back through every other question we sort of tackled here today. It's the most effective way to paint that picture is to start with, well, what were our goals? What are they? What kind of numbers do we have that can help back up that we're either moving towards or away from our goal? And then what is the sort of qualitative anecdotes, examples, etc., that we can have to sort of speak to why we're moving one direction or the other and to back it up as well. I think once you put all those things together, that's going to be the most effective picture painted, I guess, to keep with the question terminology here for the stakeholders that are looking for that information.
So I guess the thing I'll add to this is this is one of my favorite stories about trying to communicate community information to an internal organization. And this is not my story, so I don't get to claim credit for this innovation. This was at eBay 10, 15 years ago. What they did was they created a barometer, so they made like a little temperature gauge on their reports, because they were having, so the problem they were having was they had all of this qualitative information about whether or not the community was happy with what was going on at eBay or with different, because eBay is so, your happiness is so dependent on whether or not eBay is functioning properly. And they didn't have great quantitative ways of being able to add all this up, or sometimes you get these great sellers or these very important people in your community who are having a particular issue, but it's if you look at them as a population, they wind up being very small. This is where sometimes if we try to quantify the qualitative information, we get ourselves into trouble because then we marginalize somebody who's actually going to help us improve our product or our service or whatever we're offering. So they were having problems getting this information to developers and throughout the company to actually enact change within the actual product of eBay. And they came up with a barometer, and they lied. They just said, we're now going to have a barometer. This is basically community happiness, and they pegged it at like 7. And they just said, we're going to start at 7, give us room to either grow or drop. And then they would just every month, or I think it was every month, they'd gather up all their different community manager analyses and qualitative information, and they'd kind of go, okay, it looks like it's an 8 this month. Great. So then they'd raise the barometer to 8, and didn't do a lot behind it. Didn't call a lot of attention. They just kind of put it on there. And what they found was when the sentiment started to drop, and it dropped to 7, or 1 month something terrible happened and it dropped to 6, then suddenly business leaders and devs were coming to them and saying, hey, why did this drop? Now they could have the conversation. What it did was it allowed them to have that conversation, to get their attention, and then actually have the conversation to be able to paint that picture of here's what's really going on and actually enact change within the service.
That's actually really awesome. That's a great idea.
And completely made up. So, again, that's the other lesson about, and the pitfall of quantifying things is if you put a number up on a board, everyone wants to make it go up, unless you make it negative and then they want to make it go down. One way or the other, and people will do whatever they can in order to make that number go up. So you can use that to your advantage, but you also have to be careful that sometimes that will lead to unintended consequences. But you can make things up and just go, here's a number, community happiness, and community happiness is 80% this month.
Yeah, it reminds me of anybody can make up a statistic, and 76% of people know that.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's awesome. So Michael Boyce, I'm bringing in his question real quick. Michael, thanks for hanging out with us and asking your questions. Michael asks, what strategic models do any of you like to use? That sounds like a really technical question.
Do we have a little more context?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at a couple of things. So I mean, there's just the overall thing of objectives, goals, and then you get down to your actual achievements and measurements. Something that's not always used when you have an objective. If your objectives are not clear of we're trying to make money or we're trying to make a profit or we're in a business or something like that. Say you're a nonprofit and you're trying to achieve equality for a particular class of people, or you're trying to achieve educational success for children, which can take years and years to even know if you've had an impact on it. There's a thing called the theory of change, where similar to what Sheldon said, or wait, was it Sheldon? May have been Brew, who said you focus on what the it was Brew who said you focus on what the headline is. What is it that you want? What change do you want to see in the world, and what would have to be different about the world in order to get to that particular change? And so this gives you leading indicators, or this gives you smaller indicators of, if I can change these things about the world, or about this small segment of the world, then this larger change will occur. Now, your theory of change might be wrong, but at least what you have now is a model that you can go along and say, okay, I'm doing these things, and does it seem like it's right? So it's called the theory of change, and I've used it when people are trying to have missions that are very, very difficult to actually nail down in any kind of quantifiable way.
Oh, there we go. Michael did tweet in and said, not a technical question. He's just looking for approaches to planning objectives, probably, and minding relevance. Sorry, not clear. So does that help?
The model that we use for the entire organization is, I'm not sure if this is exactly what he's asking, but we use the OKRs, which is objectives and key results. And we use that throughout the organization. It's something that I don't know if it specifically came from Google or started at Google, but if you do a query for OKRs or objectives and key results, there's lots of great posts on there that talk through how exactly to do that. I'm looking at one right now that's like how to make OKRs actually work at your startup. And it's been a really great way for us. Essentially, we have the overall company objective, the specific key results, which are going to be actionable or measurable items, and then you have action items that you're going to do to specifically get to those key results. You do that at a company level, and then within each organization, we do that, and they have to map to the objectives, the company objectives. And that helps us keep everything mapped up to what the company objectives are, and we go through those on a quarterly basis. And that's specifically what we use.
Oh, so that sounds something like we had used in the past. We actually, in my department anyways, we're using that OKRs as well. With a previous manager, of the company, especially, we had this thing. It was called a Hoshin. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this, and it sort of works the exact same way. It starts off with here's what company objective is. Here is how we can sort of go about doing it, and then it maps into here are all the little actions that help us to do that one thing, that then feed back into the company objective. So it's sort of just like strategic planning in general, I think. If you're a strategic planner, I forget who asked the question, sorry. I was just trying to see there. But it's, yeah, basically what and said, it's start with your main objectives, start breaking it down, or your goals, break those down into littler objectives, break those down into actions, and then break those down into sort of tactics and things like that.
One thing to add to that is making sure that each of those action items has an owner. So if you put a person, some human being is the owner of that action, or that action item of making sure that something happens, we found that that is extremely helpful to know exactly who the owner is. You may be the owner of all the things, but it's helpful for you and all the other people on the other teams or whatever to know that, and know if someone else has has a hand in helping or what that is.
All right, words of wisdom from all. This was great, guys. Once again, another episode I can't wait to rewatch and take some good notes. I know next week we don't have a topic yet, but we will soon, I'm sure. We'll figure something out. Dom and I are both traveling, so it'll be Cherie and maybe a guest co-host. So I guess have a great week, and we'll see you guys next Friday.
Adios, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, and especially